All right, our next panel is Aligning Mental Health and Well-Being, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bryant Ford, psychologist and associate director of Counseling and Human Development Center at Dartmouth College.
Good afternoon. As I was thinking about this panel, I was on a mental health section leader call last Friday, and it got me thinking about some of the things that folks have been mentioning today. In particular, I think what we're going to talk about on our panel. And what I mean by that is we were discussing how many of the folks in the counseling center staff were talking about how they were seeing an influx of a lot of students who were seeking mental health services. And I think they were struggling with how to sort of address those issues. And what we know is when there's an increase in services, folks were increasing not only intakes, but also psychiatric medications and also on-call and hospitalizations. And I think what was happening was we were having conversations about, well, what does that really mean when it affects the students' mental health and well-being? So what we do know is that when students have poor mental health, it could affect their ability to academically persist, and then also could affect other areas of their life as well. So what I'm hopeful and proud of to be moderating this panel where we're going to be exploring some of those aspects today. And I have an all-star panel with me that I'm going to introduce, and I'll starting with my right. I have Laura Horne. Laura is the Director of Programs at Active Minds. She develops innovative strategies and unique partnerships to empower students to help schools and society embrace a comprehensive public health approach to mental health. Prior to Active Minds, she worked with the National Association of County and City Health Officials and with Tulane University. To her right is Dr. Jamie Davidson, who is an AVP, Associate Vice President of Student Wellness at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Jamie is a licensed psychologist, and he also supervises, or under his purview, he has the Counseling Center, the Health Center, the Wellness Promotion, as well as the Disability Center, the Women's Center, and Student Conduct. Jamie is a fellow of ACHA and also a former past president. And to his right is Dr. Roy, who serves as the Chief Clinical Officer of the JED Foundation and is the Assistant Clinical Professor at the Yale School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. She has been actively involved in college strategic planning initiatives focusing on a holistic approach to education, crisis management, and a public health model for delivery of care on college campuses. And to her right, we have Dr. John H. Dunkle, who is the Executive Director of the Counseling and Psychological Services at Northwestern University. He also directs the Center for Awareness, Response, and Education. He is a licensed psychologist and is credentialed by the National Register of Health Service Providers, and he's a board governing member of the Association for University Counseling, College Counseling Center Directors. Welcome to the board, please. All right, so what we want to do is start. We heard a lot about trends related to campuses, a lot of trends about what's happening on campuses. And the first question I have for the panel is if you could maybe talk about, do you have a sense of the trends on campuses in the realm of student mental health? How are mental health and well-being related?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about mental health, but I know when I get a call from a faculty member or the president's office and they say they want to talk about the mental health of a student, they don't mean mental health, right? They're talking about a concern they have. Generally we're talking about mental illness. So many times mental health is a misnomer like that. We're really not talking about their health on that dimension. We're talking about a concern that we have about a student. So I think that's an important distinction that seems to come out especially when we're talking about emotional well-being, as I like to call it on our campus. There's a model that I think that's been referred to several times. You've heard about Corey Keyes. I think there's this key model that really helps separate and give us a better understanding of what's going on. And in a basic sense, Corey's model says that mental health and mental illness are separate dimensions. Sometimes we think mental health's over here and mental illness is over there, like in a continuum. But his model says, no, they're two separate dimensions, right? So you can have mental illness, but the other dimension, which he calls mental health, basically says that you're flourishing or languishing. And I think this really has important implications for all of our work. And what this means is that a student can have a psychological condition, all right? They can have one, but they can still be flourishing and doing quite well. But it also means that we can have a student, a healthy student, right, with no psychological conditioning, but they're languishing. And we're also concerned about those students. That has a big implication. And to me, one of the biggest is if we're talking about really the presence of mental illness, only licensed professionals on campus really can provide treatment. However, if we're talking about mental health, right, I feel like every campus community member can help promote the flourishing of a student. And that's why I really think this is a key distinction to make, and it clarifies our roles, when we're thinking about campus.
I'm John Dunkle. As he said, I'm representing the Association for University and College Counseling Center Directors, and I'm the executive director at Northwestern. Our organization, AUCCD, has 859 active members. I just got that number fresh today, and about 150 Maritime members. So it's a pretty big organization. As a matter of fact, Saturday next week, we are all going to be down in New Orleans gathering for our annual conference. And if your counseling center director on your campus is not a member, please encourage them to join. We do an annual survey of our counseling center directors and members in it, and we get a good sense of a lot of the trends that are going on. In addition, we also have a great partnership with the Center for Collegiate Mental Health, which is out of Penn State University, where they are collecting, it's been in existence now for over a decade, collecting data from counseling centers around the country. And incidentally, AUCCD is more than just a national organization, it's an international organization. We have a rapidly growing international group of directors who are part of us. But we collect a lot of data and get a good sense of some of the trends. And the nice thing about, one of the nice things about CCMH, the Center for Collegiate Mental Health, is they're collecting data in a way that is consistent, it is standardized, so we can compare apples to apples as much as possible. But a couple of highlights that I would say based on my experience in the organization as well as my experience as a mental health professional is that, obviously anxiety is the top issue. Stress, depression is up there. Suicide is always a concern on every campus. And for those of you who have not seen the most recent CDC report on suicide, I can warn you it's not very it's pretty discouraging and actually pretty scary, where they're seeing that suicide rates are going up in every state except one. So that's always a concern. The other big thing that I would say that counseling centers are experiencing, is true at mine, is that we know from data that we're collecting that rapid access appointments, they need to be seen right away, are going off the charts, outpacing what we would refer to as routine access. And so that has posed a lot of challenges for counseling centers on how to respond. We have to pay attention to those rapid access because they could be potentially at high risk. So those are some of the things I would point out.
So thank you, Jamie, for bringing up Corey's work, because I think it relates well to what we've heard a lot, which is a public health approach to promoting emotional well-being on our campuses, and the clarity it does bring to roles. I work at the JED Foundation. I spent my whole life on college campuses before coming to JED 4 years ago, so I have a pretty good sense of the lay of the land on campus. And I'll say that as we work with colleges across the country and faculty are involved in the teams that we work with, there is such a sense of relief when we talk with them about how they can help. And the relief comes when we say we are not asking you to be mental health clinicians. And I think Corey's model is a really good example of that, that yes, you need a clinically trained individual to deal with mental illness, but we all have a role in mental health. And when that role for faculty in particular, and I'd be lovely to hear from the faculty in the room, is more a humanistic connection with the student, like you notice that maybe something's a little bit off with a student and you, just like you would with any human being that you interact with, offer a warm hand, hey, is everything okay? Simple micro interactions that really can help someone feel like, oh, you noticed, you cared. You're not, if obviously they start to talk about a serious issue, you know where to get them professional help. But I think this notion of how do we help all of our students flourish, know where to send them when they do have a condition, but not necessarily make that assumption, and noting that we all have a role to play. And I will say, again, the data you cite from Penn State, which is a survey of students who actually access the counseling center, is one great set of data. But when we think about the surveys like the NCHA or the Healthy Minds study that surveys all students, so not just students who actually come for help, we know those numbers are much greater, right? There's many, many students out there who are struggling, who are not coming to their counseling center. So again, highlighting the role of others in our campus, coaches, athletic trainers, academic advisors, faculty, security, all the folks in the students' world where they are organically, where if we all are trained, if you will, or educated to know how to reach out in our own way, I think we really can help move the needle much more quickly than just referring everyone to a counseling center, which is at capacity or over capacity.
I'll just add that I was really pleased to hear all the conversations that happened earlier today, and I think we're actually all on the same page as to the connection between student well-being and mental health, and that when we talk about well-being, we're talking about wellness in very many aspects, and that's how we talk about it too at Active Minds is there is no physical health without mental health, there is no health without mental health, and we train our students to think about mental health in that way, and they're very receptive to that. And in terms of the trends, as Nancy mentioned, we do have data available to help us track the trends, like the Healthy Minds study and the National College Health Assessment, which can help us hear directly from students as to what they're experiencing. And on my level, what I hear from students is that they're very much aware about the increased demand for services. They're very concerned about the long wait times to see a counselor, and more students are becoming engaged in this issue and want to be a part of the solution and want to take action. And so we're on our end trying to train them and provide technical assistance on how they can work productively with their administrators as equal partners in the work. And I think that's one of the promising trends. I would say outside of this room, discussions around student mental health tend to be brought up when something goes wrong, when there's a tragedy on campus. And I think in talking about it in terms of well-being, it's a very good pattern of trying to change the narrative and elevating what's actually working well, because I know a lot of us have collected data that shows that students and campuses are making inroads into improving student well-being. And we need to hear more about those strategies that are working so that we can replicate them on campuses and talk about student mental health also in terms of what's working.
So many of you hinted at sort of data and research that's happening. I was wondering if maybe you could talk about what research and work is being done regarding the emotional well-being of students.
I think, Nance, you mentioned the Healthy Minds study. I think that is great work being done. It's not just a clinical sample. The ACHA, NCHA assessment, that is also very important. I mentioned CCMH. There's also a book recently published by two of my former supervisors and mentors who are now my friends and colleagues. Dolores Cimini, who some of you may know from ACHA, who's just great, and Estela Rivero, who is the director of the Counseling Center and AVP at Albany, where I did my graduate work. They just published a book on promoting behavioral health and reducing risk amongst college students, which is actually the title of the book. And it's really great. It brings together a whole bunch of, well-known experts in the area, and it really provides a framework of promoting behavioral health, and it really summarizes really nicely the connection between the data on all the interventions and student success, retention, and whatnot. It's a great book. It was just published, and I think it's one that you should consider looking at. It's really, I think, one of the best ones out there right now.
So one of the things we're working on at the JED Foundation with the schools that we work with in the JED campus program is very much data focused, and some folks brought this up this morning around how are we measuring impact on students. So we have lots of ideas and notions about practices, policies, programs to promote emotional well-being, but how do we know they're having an impact, the desired impact that we want to have? And so this is, we don't have the data yet to show it, so I wish I could report that, but maybe in a few years I can. We've worked with the Healthy Minds study group out of University of Michigan, Daniel Eisenberg and his team, to map our theory of change through JED Campus with the Healthy Minds study. So our program is a systems change program. We're looking at your policies, your programs, through our comprehensive model, which probably many of you know about. So we assess at time one, okay, what do you have on your campus? Where are your gaps? What are you doing well? And at the same time as we do that, we administer the Healthy Minds, well, Daniel administers the Healthy Minds study. So schools can get a clean sort of baseline data set of where their students are on the very issues that we're interested in moving the needle on systemically. So what would the correlation be of what we want to see in students as a result of that systems change? And then at the end of the 4 years, after we work with schools, and you can read about that if you want, we reassess so that we are mapping specific student outcomes that we think we ought to be seeing if you're affecting the kind of systems change that, you know, the evidence suggests will actually have these outcomes. And I don't know that there's a lot of data out there that measures in that sort of fine-tuned way the impact we're having on student outcomes. A lot of data, I think, is on, was this program effective? Did it change your attitude? But they're usually short-lived. And so knowing the long-term effect of those kinds of interventions is, I think we're still in the infancy stages. So I'm hopeful that we will have some good data with a large enough N at the end of the day to make some kind of statements. Of course, again, it won't be like someone mentioned earlier, you know, this set of students get the experience and this set doesn't. But I think it's a pretty good start, and I'm excited. I'll be excited to share that as we move forward.
Building on what you said, Nancy, I think one of the challenges, if you're really trying to get the big picture of emotional well-being on your campus, is a lot of the research is out there still measuring mental illness. And there's nothing wrong with that, if we're honest, looking at it. You know, it's healthy information to have, it's helpful. The NCHA, I think, does a good job of, looking at both dimensions of what's there. But sometimes I think you have to go bigger than the typical instruments we use from a kind of a healthcare perspective. So, I mean, if you're thinking of emotional well-being, kind of, the PERMA model Martin Seligman uses, I mean, he's talking about happiness, life satisfaction. He's talking about engagement, relationships, meaning and purpose in life, accomplishment. So a lot of times I think we can look at other assessments that are being done. So I think many campuses do, for example, the NESE, right, which looks at student engagement. So I have found that that's helpful data when you understand the definition of well-being and how it's different, necessarily sometimes with our micro-focus, on mental illness. I find that when I look at the big picture of assessment we're doing on campus, it's really helpful in trying to get a sense of, well, what do we know about student engagement? What do we know about the relationships and the quality of relationships that students have? Their sense of belonging, to others. Do they feel accepted? Do they feel like they engage and belong at the university? I mean, all that research is really helpful, I think, if you're trying to look at, what most of us consider well-being.
I'll add that in the last year, we had a longitudinal study published that looked at the power of peer-to-peer in changing behaviors around mental health. And it's the first of its kind to go beyond just anecdotal evidence to see that peer-to-peer does work in terms of empowering students to help other students. We saw that even among just the general student body, having a presence of a group like Student Active Minds changed knowledge and attitudes around mental health, and then students who were directly involved actually had behavior change all within a single academic year. And so I think that's a great contribution to our conversations around this topic, is that we now know beyond just anecdotally that the peer-to-peer approach is a powerful way to change emotional well-being on campus and to change the culture around mental health on campus. Additionally, I'll add that another trend that there's a lot of recent research into now is improving equity in mental health on campus. And the Healthy Minds Study and Steve Fund recently published some new data addressing disparities on campus, and I know they will continue to do some work in that area. And the Healthy Minds Study has a new module now that addresses diversity and inclusion. So campuses who participate in that national study can now add that module and start tracking the impact of their work on mental health in terms of improving disparities.
Yeah, I'll just say, the JED Foundation worked with the Steve Fund to develop the equity and mental health framework, and from that came a set of recommendations for how schools might consider enhancing what they do for students of color and other underrepresented groups on campus, but mostly focusing on students of color. And so we have now collected, or engaged, I should say, I believe it's 19 campuses to pilot that framework, and they all will, as our JED campus schools do, all the Healthy Minds that I mentioned earlier, they're all taking the module on that Laura just discussed, which is a brand new module on diversity and inclusion. It's very targeted, both on what's the climate, what's your personal experience, all from the student perspective. So I think that's going to yield a lot of really good data. And just like with the rest of the JED Campus program, we will be tracking how much change is happening in students' attitudes, awareness, and behaviors on the diversity and inclusion issues as a result of beginning to do some more deliberate and targeted work with those groups through the framework.
Thank you. I know, Jamie, you mentioned something about student engagement in your last answer, and I wondered if maybe we could drill down a little bit further by talking about what is the connection that exists between well-being, retention, academic proficiency, and success.
Well, I think, that learning and well-being are intertwined, right? I mean, even the Greeks had that notion thousands of years ago. So I think implicitly we all know that's true. So, like on our campus, we're always talking about core curricula, right? I serve several terms on our faculty senate, so we focus about that. But maybe we're not talking about reaching students at their core, right? Which I think every class has the potential to do. So I think it's really, what are the conditions that we provide that help students to fully engage, on campus? Because I think that's essential to their well-being, right? And overcoming their barriers that are there. So that's an essential task, I think, that's every one of our responsibility to make sure we're doing that, to make sure that we're providing more than just a credential for a student. The goal of a higher education, right, is to be a transformative experience, right? And to me, enhancing well-being is part of that transformative experience.
What I would add to that, Ernest Boyer, I think many of us remember him. He was, I consider, an icon in higher education, in American higher education. He summed this up really nicely in a talk he gave at one point in late 80s, I think it was, that students cannot be academically proficient if they are physically, psychologically, or emotionally unwell. I mean, I think that just summarized. I didn't say it exactly how he said it, but it's much more poetic, I'm sure. But essentially, that's what he said. It was so simplistic, but it was very eloquent. I mean, it really summarized what I think is that connection between all of those. So that's how it is.
I think we also need to do a better job in bringing home that message to our senior leadership on campus. We all know that presidents and boards, their main job is to make sure that they have full classes, that they see students through to graduation. And someone talked about earlier about Daniel Eisenberg's economic case for supporting emotional well-being that gives that data on not only tuition dollars lost, but alumni giving that may be lost when students don't make it to graduation, things of that nature. And I think when we are speaking to different constituents about the value of this work, we need to speak to what is meaningful to them. And I think for our senior leadership, not that they're not interested in student well-being, because I do think many of them are, but we need to reinforce this notion of the relationship between well-being, academic performance, success, and making it to graduation and beyond. And then they listen. Yeah, as I mentioned, I was on campuses for probably 20 or 25 years before I came to JED, and I've used that tool to go to boards and my president at a couple of different institutions, and it really does make things happen. So I think we all, know that there's an intricate connection between well-being and academic performance and success, but I'm not sure that's a universal knowledge for the people that need to hear it.
And I think when we're ready to take that step, as we've mentioned, there are already some national resources out there that have done that work, such as the Healthy Mind Study, and they're going to be so pleased with us after this, with all the shout-outs
They don't
that
pay
we've
us,
given
really.
them.
We get no compensation.
But also the RAND Corporation has done similar work and has published research on the return on investment and investing in mental health. And then other campuses I know are looking to do the same type of work specific to their campuses, tracking the impact of their work on their students. And one such campus is Jefferson Community College in New York, which I wasn't even aware of until in the last year when they applied for our Healthy Campus Award. And they are using software to track the impact of their interventions on students, in particular low-income students, first-generation students and part-time students, and they're actually seeing movement there and have been able to provide that data to their university. And so even on a campus, when they have so few resources, have been able to make a case to their university about why they should be prioritizing those few resources on well-being by connecting it to retention. And I think what's interesting about what they are doing is what they saw make the most impact were on things like addressing food insecurity, providing childcare for their students, because that's a particular need for their students, and transportation. So things that we don't normally think of as student mental health initiatives are making the greatest impact on that particular campus. And I can't wait to hear what we learn more as more and more campuses start to look at that too.
I'd like to just add one thing. I was thinking about this a little bit more. I have my hat on as executive director, but also being part of ACHA. We launched in ACHA, we launched a strategic plan as an organization about 4 years ago, I think it is now. And it really set the path for us moving forward the next several years. And one of the things that we really are committed to is helping counseling center directors develop competencies and skills in a lot of different areas. And one of the things that we really do a lot of programming around and a lot of consulting around with each of there's a lot of collective wisdom amongst the group, is around how do we tell our story with data and explain this connection. This is a good example. And some of my colleagues have done our presentations at our national organization on like your elevator speech. You know, what would you say in like 3 seconds or 30 seconds? So being able to do that, I think, is a skill that, you know, one has to really work on. And it doesn't come necessarily naturally to everybody. And so taking all the data, a lot of people here mentioned data before, taking all those data and summarizing it is a skill that you really should develop, because it does pay off in the end, so that all different constituents understand your story. So.
You know, to build on that, I think there's a lot of value in when you're assessing the outcomes you have. We all want to show an educational impact, right? We want to show a clinical impact, you know, but I think it's very important to assess how are we impacting, you know, student learning. You know, I started sensing retention impact 22 years ago, right? So I have a long line of retention data, and you can put numbers on it, which is very powerful. But also, it's really surprising sometimes to others, to faculty, to deans, you know, when I share for our particular programs, you know, in student wellness, how students say that using our services, you know, improve their academics, their performance, their ability to stay enrolled, their concentration, you know, all the different things that we assess. So again, I think it's important to also have data for your particular services, which is buttressed by all the national data that's out there.
One other example that comes to mind is the University of South Florida, and they were able to merge their enrollment services and management department with their student affairs department into one division, so student affairs and student success division. And so now they are accountable by one shared strategic plan and incentivized to be measuring things together and working together, testing new initiatives. And not everyone's able to do it at that scale, but I think that coordination between enrollment and student affairs and the work that we're doing is really powerful.
So what are the programmatic components that every campus should have to positively impact student mental health outcomes?
I'll just say go to the JED campus website, and you will see our comprehensive model that has all the things we think you ought to address to promote emotional well-being on your campus.
I would say similarly, I mean, at our campus, we also have what's called a collaborative support network, which is we've also had the JED campus program visit our university, and we have a plan in place. And it's interesting. When we did that, I didn't think about making it accessible online to everyone to see, but it actually has made a huge difference when we did that. We did that recently, and it really shows that it's not just about the counseling center for mental health part of that, of wellness, but it's a community issue. And that there's a lot of things we're doing. The first thing that we always hear, at least on my campus, if there's something bad that happened, a tragedy or something, we need to hire more staff at the counseling center. Well, that's something definitely should be looked at, but it's not the only solution. There's a lot of other things that we're doing that are contributing to this. And we also see this, we're also demonstrating this and understand this in our organization at ACCD. Part of our strategic plan is reaching out to our various partner organizations like ACHA, NASPA, so on and so forth, because we know we need to partner and we need to learn from them and they can learn from us because we have a lot of experience around the mental health aspect. So.
I think that what's going to work on one campus is not necessarily going to work on another, but the basic principles, I think, are the same. And we also have our Healthy Campus Award, where we every year summarize the key findings of everything that we've learned from the applicants to our award, where you can go online right now and download those reports, and they're public. But some of the things that we encourage that do look different in practice from campus to campus, depending on what fits, is tracking the impact through data, defining health broadly, approaching it collectively across multiple departments, policy and long-term solutions, a commitment there, ensuring clinical services are accessible, addressing gaps for student populations that are traditionally marginalized, championing student voices, and then making the most of your available resources. Often it's not a lack of resources, it's how those resources are being prioritized. And from campus to campus, how they're observing those principles looks different. I think that's really important sometimes, but the basic principles I think are the same, and there's a lot of overlap there with the JED framework as well.
I think that's really a challenging question. What component should every campus have? I mean, in the most basic sense, I think you should have some form of treatment that's available to students that need that to access it. But on the other hand, we certainly have the responsibility, to craft for all students those opportunities to enhance and grow their well-being. And maybe in my sense, then, the most basic sense is a vision that helps everyone on campus tie together what they're doing. Because as long as we're siloed, I think it limits our impact. And when there's a broader vision that helps people see how we're all contributing to the same thing, I think that really strengthens what you do and empowers it. So, that's what I think is the most basic, and that's not an easy task, by the way. I've been working on our campus for years trying to do that, but I think the more that everyone can see that, for example, I always say to my student affairs colleagues, I think like the wellness wheel is a great model for understanding what we do in student affairs. So it's really just creating that vision that everyone can see how what I do contributes to the well-being of our students.
I just want to add one thing. It just maybe as we're talking about different partnerships and who should we be collaborating with, et cetera, one that I didn't hear today, I don't think, was that of the admissions office. And on our campus, as I'm sure is true on all of yours, is that they do these tours of potential families or students and their families. I forget who brought that up. We are visiting this campus today. And so one day I was walking back from Whole Foods, where I go to get my lunch usually, and I got behind a tour. And it's usually an current undergraduate, walking backwards. And they're really good at it, actually. Anyway, so they stopped in front of our building where we share with the health services. And I said, I'm going to listen to hear what they say. And of course, they promise oceanfront property in Arizona, because they're trying to woo these students here and their families. And that's all well and good. And, but what that gets to is they say things like, well, you get it's one-stop health, wellness needs. You can get everything here. You don't have to go off campus. Well, I wanted to raise my hand and say that's absolutely not technically all true. But, that brings me to the point of being realistic and clear about your scope of services and what you can and cannot do. We really have to get better at that because it feels like, I think, to these families, a bait and switch. Well, you said that my son or daughter could go there. and be seen. And we can't see every single student for as long, especially in the counseling center. So anyway, I thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I also think that there's sometimes a misperception that doing this work requires a ton of resources. And it's not to say that most schools probably could benefit from more resources put in this direction, but there's a ton of free stuff out there. There's lots of creative ways to do this work. We work with schools that are little to no resources, and they do tremendous work. It's a matter, as Laura said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Some schools are going to, hey, they have all the money in the world, we're happy to work with them and help them spend it. But there's also schools that have next to nothing that do a tremendous amount. And there's lots of creative ways to get this work done. So I think sometimes we dismiss what's possible and just sort of throw up our hands because we don't have the resources. And, you know, not only our JED Foundation site has tons of free stuff, free campaigns, free everything, but so do many organizations that are out there that have tons of free stuff on their websites that you can just pick up and use.
And by engaging in those partnerships, we're increasing the resources available to us to do this kind of work.
I believe we had some questions.
We have quite a few questions.
Oh, okay.
Do you have recommendations for breaking the barriers that separate CAPS and student health in terms of sharing information, PHI, EHR, et cetera?
I would just say that is a very loaded question.
We need another seminar.
We could probably
on
talk
that.
the whole day on that, and there's very different perspectives, so there's integrated models of care. But no matter what, I think you can have collaborative care, whether it's an integrated center or you have a separate health and counseling center. It's about working together to impact students. And what we're talking about here with well-being is saying that it's actually far beyond that, right? It's everyone on campus that we're trying to look at as a partner, you know, that we're working together to enhance well-being. So.
I will add that, you know, AOCCD is working on a white paper currently on different organizational structures. I agree with Jamie that, to me, it's not about whether you're integrated or not, it's about how you collaborate. I'm on a campus and in a center where we are not administratively integrated. Both the executive director of the health service and I report to our vice president, but we work very collaboratively with the health services, and we have structures in place to be able to, you know, work around various student issues, like we have an eating concerns team, we have an AOD team, we have a student athlete team. So really it's about collaboration. And I've worked in all different models. I've worked in a model where we were integrated, and there's pros and cons to both, but it's about a collaboration to me. And that's what's most important. And you can be integrated and not collaborate, and vice versa.
Right.
So.
And there's so many different ways that schools do it. And we work with schools that do it in a variety of ways. Whether some have an integrated record, some have firewalls on certain stuff in their record. Some don't have, they have totally separate records, but they meet once a week or once a month, or they have small teams that work on shared cases. I mean, again, back to what's going to work on your campus, the bottom line being, how do we provide what we've all been talking about today, which is a holistic approach to comprehensive care for our students. So if you're being seen, you know, in the medical center for, you know, headaches, and you're coming every week, and no matter how many tests the primary care physician does, there's no physiological etiology for the headaches, and they don't know that the student is also being seen in counseling for severe anxiety, you know, that is going to inform, or in this case, perhaps not inform, their approach to care. So, you know, how did your institution do that in a way that fits for you and that people can come to agreed premise on? The other big thing that I think hopefully more and more schools we're seeing starting to do is screening in primary care for mental health. A brief screen before students come in for their whatever their flu or whatever they're coming in for. You know, there's probably not a day that goes by that you don't pick up the newspaper or read online about behavioral health being integrated into primary care in our ERs, in our society at large, at our doctor's offices. And yet, you know, as higher ed institutions, and we tend to think of ourselves as leaders and progressive in this field, there's still quite a number of schools that don't screen in primary care for behavioral health. And then what do you do when you have a positive, right? And so thinking about what, again, is going to work on your campus for managing that. Because we know just saying, oh, go to the counseling center, 9 times out of 10, that ain't going to happen. So what do we do, and what are some creative strategies for helping those students that do screen positive in a variety of ways? So I think there's a lot that we can do in that arena.
The executive director of the health service and I have made a joint proposal for 2 licensed clinical social workers who will do just that, where the primary care providers will, there will be a screening and there will be a warm handoff to a mental health professional. So we are trying to get that in place, and we proposed it together. It's a good example where, while we're not administrative integrated, we're working very closely together to make sure that we do things like that.
This is a quick one. Can you repeat what campus is doing research on low-income students and well-being?
Healthy Mind Study.
Healthy Mind Study, great. Would the panelists be willing to share how they assess for learning outcomes through counseling services?
Well, we do it, well, when you say counseling services, do you mean the clinical or the outreach and education programming? We do all that? Okay, I'll do both. Well, the learning from clinical services, group therapy, individual therapy, that type of thing. We have on our campus, in our center, different outcome measures that we use, as well as asking them open-ended questions, which I find the most fascinating about what they learn, for example, from group therapy. I just love reading those, and they will write a lot about what they take from the group therapy and individual therapy experiences. So, and then we try to summarize all that. In terms of our outreach and educational programming, we do assessment afterwards usually. Sometimes we do pre-post on a lot of different things. We have Question, Persuade, Refer, the QPR suicide prevention program, and we do pre and post with that. And there are a lot of other ones that if someone's interested, you certainly email me. I'll be happy to share them with you.
Just to add to what John's saying, I think a part of it is just building into your assessment outcomes when students complete counseling. So I think we have a series of 8 questions we ask about academic contribution, and if we're talking about retention, kind of a quick and dirty way to do it is every student that comes in to student wellness on our campus, we ask them, are thinking about dropping out from our institution. We ask them why, and by and large, it's due to mental health concerns. And we have a special process we do when students are dropout risk, but then we just follow them for their entire career to track whether they stay enrolled at our institution. I can tell you from my institution, and we've been doing this a long time, right now generally we retain students in the 90 percentile, students that come into our counseling center, say they're thinking of dropping out. When they complete treatment, we retain them at 90+%, which is it's significantly higher than our retention rate for the average student on campus. So when you're considering this as an at-risk population, I think it can be a very powerful outcome.
And to answer the question that I asked just a second ago, Jefferson Community College in New York. Do you ever offer programs at off-campus facilities where a bulk of the residents are some of your students? And do you have any programs that engage students that might not have otherwise participated in due to living off campus?
Not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Certainly. It's actually a pair of questions about living off campus.
Okay.
And so the question is, what are you doing to utilize or to help these students who are living off campus in either off-campus facilities or on-campus programming?
So I think one thing to answer that question, for example, at our school, we don't have fraternities and sororities. We have them, but we don't have the housing on campus. So we will go, to their houses, and do presentations very commonly, like on the weekends. But the other thing that we're really trying to do is if we're doing a campus presentation now, we're trying to record it and make it available online, right? And for many students, that's more convenient with their challenging schedules, that they will watch it on YouTube, on the weekend, but they may not have the time to come in to attend a particular meeting. So we're trying to be better about recording sessions that, we're presenting.
I think technology is a big key for us too. Actually, the vast majority of students who visit our counseling center are on campus, but we have a good percentage that are off as well. So technology, I think, is more and more really important. We launched anonymous online screenings, 2 years ago now, And we put in there we asked some demographic questions, including, have you ever been in treatment of any sort? And the vast majority, we get about 200 to 300 anonymous screenings that students complete. The vast majority of them have never been in any treatment. So we're reaching the individuals we really want to reach, those who've never been. And so those are ways that we're really, I think technology is one really important way to do that. We have to get even more creative and comfortable with it. Counseling centers, professionals in general, sort of get a little uneasy about, using technology, including yours truly at times, but I'm open more and more to it.
Our campus is transitioning and building a well-being program has been tasked to a single person. Where do you recommend starting?
When we first started, when we first launched the JET Campus program, we sort of intuitively reached out to counseling center directors. And it was to engage, like, would your campus be interested, blah, 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 because they're the natural partners, right? And then a little ways in, sort of the light bulb went off and said, wait a minute, if one of our underlying premises, we have two underlying foundations for the program, and that is, you need to take a public health approach to these issues, which is campus-wide, no longer falling primarily or certainly not exclusively to the health and counseling centers. And number two, you need to have support from the top down. If you don't have those two things in place, the likelihood that you're going to have a great degree of success is slim. And yet, who are we going to? So we weren't really putting our money where our mouth is. So we've kind of shifted set. Certainly counseling and health are important and integral players in the team, but we target college presidents, provosts, AVPs, VPs, because when they're on board, things happen much more quickly, and not necessarily even in terms of contributing resources, even though there sometimes is different resource allocation or reallocation. Mostly it's when senior leadership is saying, hey, this is important on our campus. When they say something, people tend to listen. And so having that endorsement and having it be campus-wide. So we learn as we go. I'm not embarrassed to say that. We're still learning. We'll continue to learn throughout our trajectory. So I think we all have to think about how we approach these things, and sometimes unknowingly not even realize what we're doing.
My advice on that is I don't think it really matters which office it is. And it's a mistake to think it needs to be in the counseling or health center, right? Or the rec center, I would pick the person that's most passionate about it, right? And see them as a champion for pulling others together. Because when you say it's a person's job or a department's job, there's a tendency to think that's their job, not our job. But if it's known from the beginning, it's everyone's job. So I would say whoever's most passionate about it on your campus, that's probably who I would pick.
This was touched on a little bit, but do you have an opinion on clinicians in student health helping students and our CAPS colleagues by starting management for non-suicidal students with depression and anxiety?
Can you repeat the question?
Do you have an opinion on clinicians in student health helping students and our CAPS colleagues by starting management for non-suicidal students with depression or anxiety?
So that's the model we use at UNLV. So essentially, there's such a large need on campus that we work very collaboratively with the Health and Counseling Center. So we have a behavioral health team. So yes, we do that on a regular basis and communicate clearly so we all know what's going on and refer mutually to our services. So I think it can be very helpful, is my thoughts.
So what I wanted to ask was, if you could talk more about scaling programs. You mentioned that not all campuses are the same size or resourced in the same kind of way. And I imagine if some folks want some take-home messages, how they might be able to implement this on their campuses. Could you talk a little bit about how they might be able to scale them to size?
I'll just reiterate some of the other points that we made, that there are frameworks available that can be tailored to your campus. So basic principles that are meant for you to take and prioritize based on your own campus's needs and can be implemented in different ways depending on what the needs are. I would say one of the things that I'm wary of myself is I don't want to get too dependent on frameworks. I wonder sometimes if my framework is going to be out of style in a couple of years. I always want to go back to students as my anchor in figuring out what's relevant, not for all questions, but for many questions. We're trying to impact students, and I think students are really the experts there. And they're not just end users, they're equal partners in the work. And they can often come up with creative solutions that we'll be talking about at a panel like this in a couple of years. And so in addition to taking those checklists and making sure that we're thinking about the things that have worked at other campuses, and joining campus networks where you can hear from other campuses about what's working and try them on your own, getting really in touch with students and letting them, and the data as well, letting that drive what you do.
You know, I think we can't stress enough, and I'm so happy that Laura is here from Active Minds, the power of the student voice. If you really want to get something done on your campus, if students speak up, it will happen. And that's awesome. And so the fact that, you know, we all have said, we all know students go to each other before they go to anybody else, and that's all great. But I think it's really only until recently, as Laura was talking about earlier, that we actually have some data that shows that it's efficacious, right? That students really not only go to each other, but it's working, right? And so in thinking about scale, I was chatting with a new counseling center director at a school that had not a great reputation among the students. The counseling center did not have a good reputation, and so this new person came in, and one of the things I said, oh, I've heard good things about you, and it was from a student group, a very active student group on their campus, and he said, you know, if it wasn't for them, I would not have anywhere near the success that I currently have, because they went out and told their friends, and they told their friends, and they told their friends that, you know, this guy's legit, you know, and now they're reaping the benefits of that. So I think students are an incredibly important partner in terms of scaling, in terms of spreading this word, and it's great to hear the new data that it actually is effective.
I believe we're oh, were you going to say something?
Real quickly, I just want to add that, again, I think if we're talking about true well-being, we already have many people on campus already doing it. And to me, the simple answer is vision transcends scale, right? It doesn't really matter what size the campus is. In some ways, it's easier on a smaller campus to have a cohesive vision, right? But a vision is, to me, the most important component where you help everyone realize how we all work together to impact the well-being of our students.
Okay. So I know we're coming toward the end of our time today. Any final thoughts from our panelists?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for your insights, and appreciate all the things you were able to say today.
Good points, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists today and our moderators, and thank you for taking time to join us in person and online for today's summit. This concludes the first day of our program. Please join us back tomorrow morning at 8:45 a.m. for day 2 on building a culture of campus well-being. Thank you, and have a great evening.